Orange light moved across the cargo hold ceiling in a way that had no right to exist. Every system on the ship was dead, every circuit, every backup, every panel cold and black. Commander Thesic stood in the doorway, his damaged antenna tilted involuntarily toward the impossible glow. In the center of the hold, the human crouched over a pile of packing material, a rock in each hand, and between them, something burning. If that image just made you hold your breath, you're already one of us. I subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Now, let me tell you how we got here. That warmth, Thesic could almost feel it on the plates of his face, even from the doorway. A ghost of the ship's heating, maybe, except no. The last time real warmth had touched his skin was 6 hours ago, when the Vren 4 still had power, and the geologist's biggest problem was forgetting rock samples in his jacket during laundry cycles. The mission had been classified as routine, and 3-day mineral assessment run through a charted asteroid belt. Crew of 4, Thesic commanding, Callus on engineering, 1 pilot, and the human, Ren Colley, station geologist, 31, lean with weathered hands that were always reaching into sample crates or turning some fragment of ore under the corridor lights. Thesic had reviewed Colley's file before departure. Competent, quiet, no disciplinary flags. What the file did not mention was the collecting. Day 1, the human cataloged his mineral haul from the belt scans, quartz, iron pyrite, magnetite, and then pocketed a chunk of dark flint because, in his words, it was a nice specimen. Thesic had watched him thumb its smooth face during the evening brief, rolling it between fingers cracked with old calluses. A geologist who carried rocks in his jacket, like personal effects. Odd but irrelevant. The ship ran on digital infrastructure, navigation, heating, oxygen cycling, lighting, every function routed through electromagnetic systems. Redundant backups, also electromagnetic. Emergency fail-safes, also electromagnetic. The Vren 4 was, by Varathi engineering standards, triple insulated against system failure. Then Hour 37, the pulse. An uncharted anomaly, a natural electromagnetic burst so massive it registered on nothing, because by the time it could have registered, every sensor was already dead. Total system kill. Every circuit on the Vren 4 fired and collapsed simultaneously. Primary power, backup power, emergency power, navigation, heating, lighting. The corridor panels didn't flicker. They simply stopped existing as functional objects. One moment Thesic was reviewing scan logs. The next he was standing in absolute darkness. The only sound his own respiration and the faint tick of the hull contracting as heat bled into space. 3 degrees per hour. That was the rate. Thesic calculated it within the first 40 minutes using a manual optical thermometer, one of 2 non-electronic instruments aboard. Ship interior would cross -8 within 6 hours. Varathi hypothermia onset, -8. Rescue signal had been passive broadcast before the pulse. Response time estimated at 14 hours. The math was not survivable. If you want to know how a man with 2 rocks in a dead ship rewrote that math, subscribe, because this story's just getting started. In 4 hours after the pulse. -2 degrees and dropping. Callus had exhausted every restart protocol in the engineering manual, then improvised 6 more. Nothing. The young engineer's hands had begun to tremble, not from cold yet, but from the growing understanding that his entire training, every simulation, every diagnostic framework was built on systems that no longer existed. His breath came in sharp, visible bursts. Thesic compensated. He always compensated. His missing antenna made spatial data unreliable, so he defaulted to numbers, to procedure, to the architecture of problems that could be measured. He measured this one and found no solution in any system he knew. Ren was quiet. He had been quiet since hour 2, moving through the cargo hold with a patience that Thesic initially catalogued as shock. The human pulled open sample boxes, turned over chunks of ore, set some aside, discarded others. Methodical, unhurried, as if the dropping temperature was someone else's problem. Callus pressed close to the optical viewing port beside Thesic, mandibles tight. "What is the human doing?" Thesic watched. Ren extracted the dark flint from his jacket pocket, the nice specimen, and set it on the floor. Then he reached into sample box 7 and retrieved a piece of steel-bearing ore. He gathered packing material, dry cellulose fiber, and arranged it in a small mound between his knees. "Is he arranging rocks?" Callus asked. Ren struck the flint against the steel ore. A spray of sparks jumped from the contact point and scattered across the packing material. Callus flinched backward so hard his shoulder hit the bulkhead. Second strike. More sparks. The cellulose smoldered at one edge. Third strike. The packing material caught. A small tongue of orange curled upward from the cellulose, then spread, feeding on the dry fibers, growing with a steady hunger that had nothing to do with circuitry or power cells, or any system the Vren 4 had ever carried. Flame. Actual, physical flame. Combustion happening in real time on the floor of a dead ship. Thesic's data training tried to categorize it. Failed? Tried again. The process was mechanical. Fuel source. Organic cellulose. Oxidizer. The ship's atmospheric oxygen, still circulating via passive pressure differential. Ignition. Thermal energy generated by mechanical friction between flint and high-carbon steel ore. Sparks produced at approximately 800 degrees by the shearing of microscopic metal particles. No electromagnetic component, no digital interface, no circuit of any kind. The reaction predated circuits. It predated the Varathi species. It predated, if the human databases were accurate, every technology in the galactic record by a factor that made Thesic's remaining antenna ache. The Varathi had no cultural memory of this. His species had evolved in a low-oxygen atmosphere. Combustion had never been chemically viable on their homeworld. They had moved directly from geothermal venting to electromagnetic energy capture. Fire was a translated word in every Varathi dialect, borrowed from species who had crawled out of caves with burning sticks in their fists. Thesic had studied it in theory. Theoretical knowledge, he was learning. It was not the same as watching a man warm his hands over something your entire civilization never invented. The cargo hold was warming, not fast, but the thermometer confirmed it. The air nearest the flame had stopped dropping. Callus crept closer, mandibles slack, frost on his shoulder plates beginning to bead into moisture. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The fire crackled. It was the only sound on the ship that wasn't the hull ticking or their own breathing. And somehow it made the silence feel less like death. Ren fed it carefully. More packing material. A strip of cargo netting. He built the flame the way Thesic built tactical assessments, methodically, with an eye on resources and burn rate. The human's hands moved with a familiarity that went beyond training. This was something deeper, something inherited. Thesic stepped into the hold. The heat touched his faceplates first. Real warmth. He confirmed not by sensors but by nerve endings he rarely had reason to trust. He stopped 3 paces from the fire and looked down at the man crouching beside it. "Mr. Cawley." His voice was steady, measured. "How did you create energy from mineral samples?" Ren looked up. His face was lit orange from below, shadows pooling in the hollows of his cheeks, and his expression carried no triumph, no pride, just the mild confusion of someone asked to explain breathing. "Create energy?" He blinked. I just hit 2 rocks together." And now, standing in that same cargo hold, the same orange light cutting across the same dead panels, Thesic understood that the sentence was not simple. It was a summary of something so old it had no origin file, no patent, no version history, a technology that could not be updated because it had never needed to be. He began composing his post-rescue report before the rescue had arrived. The tactical note wrote itself. The electromagnetic pulse had been total. It had killed every system on the Vren 4, every backup, every redundancy, every failsafe built on 2,000 years of Vorathi engineering. It had failed against 2 rocks from a geologist's jacket pocket. Thesic typed on a manual transcription pad, one of 2 non-electronic tools aboard, and chose his words with the care of someone rewriting doctrine. Human survival technology was not exclusively digital. Their species retained functional knowledge of pre-electromagnetic methods, methods that could not be pulsed, could not be jammed, could not be disabled by any known countermeasure because they operated on thermodynamics, not engineering. Current EMP doctrine assumed technology dependency. Humans were not technology dependent. They were technology optional. He underlined the last 2 words, then underlined them again. The rescue shuttle docked 20 minutes later. Crew evacuated. All 4 alive. Core temperatures stable. Thesic was the last to leave the cargo hold. He paused in the doorway, the same doorway, and looked back. The fire was out. Wren had stamped it before boarding, a reflex he'd called campfire rules, learned from his father at age 6. The hold was cold again, dark again, dead again. But on the floor, in a circle of pale ash where the packing material had burned down to nothing, 2 rocks sat side by side. 1 flint, 1 steel ore, still warm to the touch, still capable, waiting for no system, no signal, no permission, just the next pair of hands old enough to remember what the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. So what would you have done in that dead ship? Would you have remembered the oldest trick your species ever learned? Subscribe if these stories make you think, because tomorrow another species finds out what humans are capable of, and it won't involve rocks. It'll involve something worse.